Hey, what's up guys, my name is Cherno. Welcome back to my Game Engine series, day 3 of Game Engine series week, and today we're going to be all about style, which, let's be honest, this whole series is always about that anyway. But we're finally going to be taking some time to polish up our Hazelnut editor and make it look as beautiful as possible. So over yesterday's live stream, I believe, me and the stream basically had a little bit of a chat and we played around with some colors and we decided what the theme would be for Hazelnut, and this is going to be like the default kind of dark theme. Obviously, it's possible to just go into the source code and change everything yourself and make some weird pink, colorful rainbow theme if you really want to. But in terms of what Hazel is going to ship with, we're going to have like a dark theme and a light theme. Light theme we'll do way later because it's low priority. But today we're going to be talking about how we can implement a nice looking dark theme with some nice beautiful colors and a good kind of color palette, some better usability features as well, such as having like the entire kind of header of each component and also each entity in the scene hierarchy clickable, because at the moment you actually have to click over the label and it's a bit annoying. And we'll also be using a much more beautiful font. So without further ado, let's dive into the code and take a look at how this is all going to work. So as mentioned, I have already written this code. This is, in fact, let me show you guys how I operate, because I know that a few people I think were asking about, what exactly it is that I do here on my special super secret secondary monitor. I have a patch. This is called a patch file. Basically what this is instead of committing my changes when I modify it, I can save them as a patch and then I can revert everything else. And this is basically the code that I have written, and these are pretty much all the changes that I'm now going to implement in front of you guys whilst also explaining what I'm doing. So that's kind of the idea. This is basically all the code that's going in, and obviously if I come up with some stuff on the spot that I feel like doing, then well, I'll do that as well. But usually it's pretty much just whatever's in the patch, and that's the beauty of this, the point that I can work out this stuff on a live stream and take my time, because this took hours, honestly, to tweak all of these colors and get them perfect. Took hours, and having to do that in front of you guys on this video would be a lot of pressure and also, I think, fairly boring to watch. So we can be a lot more condensed here if we want to, which we do. So let's dive into this. The first thing I want to talk about is the font. And in fact, the first thing that I want to do is actually open up this editor to just have a look at what it looks like. So this font is fairly rubbish. I don't really like it. I mean, I don't want to call it rubbish because some poor person probably made this font, and they're probably not poor. But anyway, the point is, it's a fine font. It's like the I'm GUI default font. It's very simple. It's monospaced. It looks kind of all, programmy. I don't want this. I want to have more of a normal font, like Visual Studio's font, right? So the font for Visual Studio UI and all of that stuff, we want to have something just a little bit nicer, a little bit more aesthetic, So, aside from the font though, let's talk about this other kind of styling stuff that we probably don't want to have. So first of all, these kind of blue panels, I'm not hugely into that. I want to have more of like a monochrome kind of feel. We can have like a little bit of color. I want to change this background so it's a little bit more, I don't know about if it's going to be darker or not, but I want to add a touch of blue into it, like a very, very low amount of blue there, just to give it a little bit of that, spice. If we click on one of these, we can see what this looks like. This to me is the worst part though. This looks like a disaster. I mean, we've got like the beautiful transform component, but first of all, it's very unclear what is what. Like you can see that we've got a transform component, sure, but there's no kind of, I guess, frame around this header here. So if we hover our mouse over it, we can see the kind of extent of it, but we have to actually be hovering over the label. We can't collapse it by hovering here. These buttons as well, like, this kind of overlaps the button. You can see the different sizes. There's no padding really between the sprite renderer and then the end of this scale thing, so it looks a bit weird. The add component button is just misaligned over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop this add component button over here into the top right corner, because I think it looks good there. Tag, I mean, we don't need a label for this tag. It's pretty obvious that this is the name, and it's pretty obvious that it's a text field that you can modify. I also want to change the background colors of all of these things here. And then finally, one of the things that I also want to do is set a minimum size for these panels. So you can see that at the moment we can make them this small. Now, realistically, you probably wouldn't make them this small, but even if they're this small, you can see that nothing really fits. It just looks kind of bad, and like, I don't really like that. I think there should be a minimum size that'll be maybe about this much. And then we can obviously apply that to potentially all the panels that are inside this entire dock space. So that is the plan. that's what we're gonna do. Let's start off with the font. So, as I mentioned, I have already picked a font and I've decided all this with the stream. But basically, if we take a look at Google Fonts, which is a really good place where you can just test out different fonts. There's a lot of different fonts here that you can check out. I think they're pretty much all Apache licensed, which means that as long as you ship the license with the software, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, you could spend a long time here looking through all the fonts, but the one that I really like is called Open Sans. So if we click on Open Sans, we can also download it. This is also available on GitHub if you prefer. You can download it from there. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to download this. I've actually already downloaded it before, but it doesn't matter. Download it again for you guys. We'll grab all of the files in here, including the license, and we want to put them somewhere. So if I go into Assets inside the Hazelnut project here, I'm going to go into a new folder actually that I'll call Fonts. And then we'll call this Open Sans. And then inside here, I'll paste everything. Okay, so now we have all of these font files. Now, using them with IMGUI is extremely easy. If we go into our IMGUI layer, all we really need to do is add the font. So, and set the default font to be that font. So over here inside Style, or in fact, it's in IO. If we go IO fonts, let me zoom in for you guys. So IO fonts, and then add fonts from file TTF. We just need to give the file path, which is assets, fonts, and then let's pick a font. So we're gonna use I guess we'll use the regular one for regular things. And then the size that I liked was 18, okay? That's it, that's now been added. Let's do dot. That's now been added. This actually returns an IM font. So what we can do is just directly set the default font, or font default, equal to that. Now, that's like pretty much all we need to set the font to that font. So let's launch this and see what it looks like. It looks like an error. Asset fonts, Open Sans. I forgot Open Sans. There you go. And there you go. Suddenly this looks really nice, I think. And we're obviously using a different font. It looks a bit more like a program and not like a little IMGUI widget. Which is good. And yeah, that's it. Now, while we're on the excuse me, while we're on the topic of fonts, let's talk about these things, right? They're kind of looking thin, and I want them to look kind of thick. So what I'm going to do is use a bold font for these kind of X, Y, and Z, just because I think it looks nice, right? So what we'll do is we'll also add a bold font. Now, how are we going to manage more than one font, you ask? Well, it's not really a huge problem. What I'm going to do is, obviously load the other font like a normal person. So let's go and load Open Sans bold. Let's just type the word bold. Except what I want to do now, right, is obviously like the way that the fonts are stored. If you actually look at the way that the fonts are stored, inside IM Font Atlas, there's actually another little field here, member called fonts, which is a vector of IM font pointers. So inside here, we basically have all of the fonts. So font 0 is kind of like the first font, and then we add this one essentially as font 1, I guess. They're stored in order. So if we remember that the last font in this collection is the regular font, right? That's our default font. Then we can say that the first one is, or number 0 is bold. You probably want realistically a slightly better system for managing this. Like in other words, instead of having to keep track of the fact that the first font inside the collection is our bold one, which is kind of dodgy, especially if we add more fonts later, you probably want to just have like some kind of font library maybe yourself, or build something on top of IMGUI so that you can get them by name or by like some kind of enum, or I'm not sure. It's up to you. I'm going to leave it as is because it's not a big deal. And we only have 2 fonts for now. So what I'll do is inside the scene hierarchy panel, if we go to draw vec 3 control, all I'm going to do is, first of all, I want to retrieve the font, right? So we need to get access to all the fonts. So I'll do IMGUI IO equals IMGUI get IO. So this gets us our font data that we want. I'll do auto bold font equals IO fonts, and then fonts 0, right? That's the first one. So 1 would be the regular one, our default font, and 0, of course, being the bold one. And then it's as simple as just pushing the font. So whenever I render this button, right, the X button, for example, I just want to do IMGUI push font, bold font. And then when I'm done with it, I pop it. Now you can see why, first of all, I wanted to make this a function, this whole control, but also why it's probably a good idea to make some kind of library from IMGUI that actually has a lot of the kind of, you know, standard kind of UI controls that you're going to use, because, you know, it can be very verbose. But it's not even about the fact that maybe you don't want that much code and it's too verbose and it's hard to read. It's not even about that. It's about the fact that if you obviously copy and paste similar groups of code and you don't define a proper style for your UI, you're going to wind up with little inconsistencies, because there might be an area where you accidentally set the padding or the spacing to like 2 instead of 3 or 4. And then suddenly things don't quite look right and it's very difficult to go in and find it. Whereas if you have a nice library that has like a certain style defined very clearly, and then you have to reuse your own library's controls and constraints and all that stuff, then obviously it leads to something a bit more consistent, more bug-free, and just something that's just easier to work with, which is always good. Okay, let's test that out while I drink some water. Very hot day today. Somewhat surprising. All right. So yeah, there you go. X, Y, Z look bold. I think that looks a lot better than what it did before. A little bit of a subtle change, obviously, but I think it looks nice. Okay, the next thing that I want to do is address these silly, like, header things that look terrible, and possibly the button as well. So, as you can see, if I'm going over all of these entities here and selecting them, I can't select them over here, right? That actually deselects everything. I want this to be the entire width. Luckily, that's very easy to do in IMGUI. It's actually just one little flag for our tree node. So let me find where we do our scene hierarchy, which is draw entity node. We have our flags here. What I want to do is to the flags, I want to add another flag. I'll just do it on a different line so it's not like, you know, overwhelmingly complicated here. And it's going to be called IMGUI tree node flags span available width. Okay, simple as that. So what that will do is now basically span the entire available width, and I can now, as you can see, select it like that. Really easy, right? Whereas before it was kind of like this, because we haven't added it to this one yet. See? So that's the difference. I think that looks a lot better. And it's not even a looks thing, it's more of a usability thing as well. So we'll also, this has its own kind of flags, we'll also add it to this. That is kind of temporary code, because, you know, that's kind of like before we have parenting properly working, we just have this like little weird tree node that has the same name as the other one, and it's just like simulating that. But we'll add it there for fun, just so that we don't forget to add it to our actual, you know, parented thing. So now you can see all of these are done properly. Okay, so we want to do the same thing, obviously, to the to all of our components. Now, this brings me to my next point, the whole component situation. It's getting a little bit out of hand, right? I mean, it's not that bad yet, but if you look at Sprite renderer component, which, by the way, might I add, is the only component that actually has a proper plus button that can actually remove the component. If you look at this little blob of code, right? You might see a problem. It's not really a huge problem, but it is a problem. And the problem is that exactly two lines, which could actually be in fact one line of code, are actually specific to the Sprite renderer component. And that's literally this. The whole Sprite renderer component, the whole UI for it, is just this one little color edit control. That's all that we see there. The rest of this is just basically boilerplate code that should be reused for every single other component. So when you have what looks like about 30 lines of code, and one line of that is all you need for the entire component, it's probably time to maybe write your code a bit differently, which is what we're going to do. So what we'll be doing is writing another little static function that you guys love called drawComponent. Now this is going to obviously be a template with the component type, and also I'm gonna make another template here called UI function, right? Or another template parameter, I should say, which is gonna be our UI function. So we're gonna have a label for the UI control, because if we look at this, right, we like what out of all of this code needs to be different per component. The type. That's what our template type name T is. It's the component type. We could probably name it component type, but for me, T is fine. and then also the name, sprite renderer, right? Those two things. Everything else, like the frame padding, this plus button to open component settings and be able to remove the component, all of that you can see is obviously specific to the sprite renderer component, which is our T template argument now, but everything else is the same across all components. Now, whether or not we have a remove component can also be kind of unique, because obviously, like the transform component, you shouldn't be able to remove a transform component. I mean, maybe we will allow that, I'm not sure, but ultimately you could either pass that in as a boolean or maybe even have an additional lambda that we can take in that will specify like what is exactly inside this component settings menu. Because what we're going to do is basically copy and paste all of this code. Whoa, excuse me. Stumbling over my words here. I'm too excited about this lambda stuff and like this kind of drawing component function. What we're going to do here is take all of this code, put it into our draw component function, and then the one line of code that we need, which is the color edit for, we're going to take that in as a lambda. So that way, what we can do is basically specify a function that will draw our component UI, and then we also have a parameter there where we can drop in any custom UI code that we want, anything. And that's how it's obviously going to work for something like the camera component, which has a lot more code. So going back up to the top, I'm going to, where is this? Not up to the top, here it is, draw component. So we'll have to take in a name, right? We'll have to take in the current entity because we need to be able to like access certain things from the entity potentially, as well as remove the component from the entity. So we need to be aware of what entity's component we're actually rendering here, or we're drawing. And then finally the UI function. Okay, that's what our draw component function looks like. So if we go back down here into the into our original like sprite render component, let's just copy this entire blob here, and going back up to, I keep losing it, going back up to here, let's paste it in. And now sprite render component obviously becomes T, so we need to make sure that everywhere we see sprite render component, which I think is 2 more places, we replace it with T. Name is what our label becomes, so name.cstring. And then finally, instead of calling this kind of color edit, you know, whatever, we're going to actually call UI function, right? Oh, sorry, it's just called function. I'll call it UI function. UI function, and then we can optionally take in a parameter. We can do whatever we want here. It's really, I mean, it is a lambda, but we're just taking it as a template. So technically it could be anything. You just have to make sure that it executes with one parameter that's going to be correct here. We're going to take in the actual component, right? So we have entity get component, and this is kind of like our, like, I guess it's our component, which I'm going to change it a little bit. I'm actually going to probably, so we have the entity component. Let's bring this up here and I'll call this component so that the whole function has access to it. And then this component is what we'll pass in. So that just saves us having to, you know, retrieve the component from the entity or do anything like that, since we've already kind of got it here and we're inside this, you know, function that's supposed to be drawing it. We'll do that. So there we go. That's it. That is it. You can see how little code we actually needed to change to adapt this to be basically modular for everything else. So, or generic, I should say, for everything else. So basically, if we compare the before and after, draw component, sprite renderer component. Now we need to give it a name, which is going to be sprite renderer, like that. It needs to take in the entity as well. And then finally, our lambda, which is going to take in a component, our sprite renderer component, and I'll just drop it down here so that it's a little bit cleaner. And it's literally just going to do this one line of code, right? SRC is replaced with component. That's it. This is the before and this is the after. How nice is that? And the even nicer part is that for something more complicated, like this camera component, right? The actual stuff that we need is basically from this line onwards. So if we grab all of this code, right? And then write a draw component function for our camera component. Then, okay, let's see. So camera, entity, and then auto component. Let's drop that down here. Okay. Camera component is just replaced with component. You could call it camera component, but I'm just going to be a little bit cleaner here. I guess that's it. No, surely not. All right, so we had it here as well and here. Okay, and that's it. So we still have all of our UI code, obviously, because this is the stuff that's specific to our camera component, but we don't care about anything else because everything else should be generic. Every single component, kind of the header and the remove component button should all be identical. So we don't need to repeat that code. So all of this goes bye-bye. And then finally the transform component, which again is a bit of a special case because it doesn't have a lot of remove thing, but it doesn't matter. We don't really care about that. Let's copy this once again. I will add a transform component over here and transform and stop fighting me, Visual Studio. And then we'll grab all of these draw vec3 controls. TC just becomes component like that. And I think that's it. All right. Tree node flags doesn't need to be here either. So let's, oh, and also we have the tag component, but that really is a special case. I mean, that's like, an input text and it doesn't have like a proper header. It's rendered differently because it's obviously not really like a real component, like a real modular component like the rest of our components are, okay? So yes, Vague Lobster, I do remember the high DPI request thing. I will get to that. Okay, so tree node flags, we deleted that, didn't we? Wait, no, this doesn't need to be here. So we just have our draw components. Now if we collapse these, they're nice and simple, look like that. Great. Let's just Control F7 that file to make sure everything compiles inside this file. It does not, because yes, we did delete our tree node flags. I don't even remember what they are. Let's quickly undo and get back to it because I remember I deleted it recently. There it is. I'll copy that and then redo everything. And then we'll just paste them up here. But yeah, okay, good. Let's take a look at this. So we should have the same result as before, obviously, but now with the added bonus of having way less code. There we go, right? Now everything has the little plus. You can see we can remove our sprite renderer component. That should work fine. We can even remove the transform component and it should work fine, okay? Everything is good no matter what component we have. We have this little plus button that doesn't work properly. We'll fix all this stuff today, but that is the gist of it, okay? Really cool. Now let's talk about the whole kind of header and what other tree node flags we may want, because turns out we want quite a lot. So aside from default open, we want something called framed, right? What this is going to do is actually provide a frame for our entire header, and that's going to be really nice. So if we launch that, we should be able to see what that looks like. We also want it to respect frame padding and then also span the available width like we did with the other thing. So you can see now this is like kind of a full kind of like the header actually has like a background color, which is nice. So let's do framed. We might not even need span available width, but let's do it anyway. Span available width. And then I also want, we have our overlap, and I'll also add the frame padding. So that way it's just gonna take into account the frame padding. By the way, one of the ways that I discovered all these flags is not simply just by going through all this, because this is kind of, I don't know, there are comments, but it is a little bit difficult to read, is simply going to the tree node EX function, tree node behavior, and then just seeing what it does. So like, for example, you can see padding is calculated based on whether or not this flag is present. If this flag is present, it will use style frame padding. Otherwise, it will use some other calculation, right? So that's kind of, I mean, it's going to take into account some other things as well. So just know that like one of the best ways that I've found over this Game Engine Series week to kind of get to know IMGUI better is just by reading the source code, right? So you can see like, again, with this display frame, the frame kind of, in fact, how do we even do that? Display frame. So display frame will work if framed is present. If it's not, then it's not going to work. But then there's also like, you know, span available width and span full width and some other things that let you interact with it, for example. So yeah, just a few different things that you might not pick up from IMGUI just by reading comments and by reading the header files. But if you look at the implementation, it's not too difficult to find out what else you can actually do with it. So if we launch this, yeah, I feel like if we have framed, we probably don't need span available width. And you can actually, I think we you can see that. Let's go back quickly. If display frame is false and flags and one of these is present, yeah, so this actually has to be present, actually. Because if this isn't present, then it's going to be 0, and they're not going to be both true. So I guess it does need to be present for interaction. But anyway, point is, reading the source code, A++, really good way to actually figure out how you want to do something and how like certain paddings and bounding boxes are calculated, because I've had to do a lot of that over these past few days of styling. Okay, so yeah, did we launch this? Yeah, so this now looks pretty good. We have our plus button that looks terrible. Let's figure out what we can actually do with the plus button to make it look a little bit better. So I think what I did, so we've got our frame padding. That's why we enabled this like frame padding flag here. So the next thing that I did was, so actually before open, after I pushed the frame padding, I figured out the line height. So float line height is GIM font size. So this is just a better way of doing this because you can actually calculate it instead of hard coding it. Style frame padding dot y times 2. Now this is a pretty generic padding calculation. I think IMGUI actually even has comments about this, but if you dive through the source code, you can see how it calculates certain things. This is needed for us to work out the actual height of the button and the size of the button. So we'll need that. We'll need that in a minute. And it probably doesn't have to happen like here exactly, but you do have to do it after you set the frame padding. So then we'll add a separator just to keep everything nicely organized. And then we do our tree node open thing, which we did, and then I'll pop the style var over here. And then on the same line, instead of advancing get window width -25, we're actually going to advance by, we'll say IMGUI get content region available, right? Yes. .x minus the line height times 0.5. So half of the line height. So this is us basically seeing what the rest of the content available region is. The reason we use this and not the window size is because I found that using the window size doesn't take into account the scroll bar. So if the scroll bar appears, we obviously want to move everything to the left. Otherwise, it'll be behind the scroll bar potentially, and then the scroll bar will obscure our button. So we can get the content region available, X, which is better. And then we'll subtract half of the line height just to get it into the perfect spot here. Okay, and then finally when we draw our button, we can just draw it as line height by line height. And I think that should already look pretty good. So let's hit F5 and see if our plus buttons look beautiful now. Obviously we still need to play with the colors, but almost beautiful. They look a little bit too far the other way. Wonder why that is. Maybe that's to do with certain other things that we haven't set yet. But we did make that like that, separator. Oh, I didn't look at the separator. That's all right. What did I do? Line height times 0.5. It's looking, that does in fact look like what I did. So, oh, I also did push item width. That might be why. So, one other thing that I did was inside draw components. No, but that was in a different place. Oh, that was the add component button. Never mind. Okay. Yeah, that should have put our button into the right spot. I wonder why that didn't work. Font size, frame padding, y times 2. Content. Oh, sorry. We need the content region available before we actually start the control stuff. So what this will do, so let's move this over here. Basically, if we get the content region available here, obviously the content region that's available has decreased because we've just rendered a tree node EX, or a tree node. So we need to actually get the full width of the content region available before we start adding widgets to it, because as we add more widgets to the same line, obviously that's going to decrease. So this should now be perfect. All right, there we go. You can see that it's perfectly at the end. And more importantly, if I kind of make a little room here so that there's a scroll bar, you can see it all shifts to the left, which is perfect and exactly what we want. Okay, cool. So those buttons are A++ now. I guess the next thing we can do is probably move that add component button, right? So what did I end up doing for that? So the add component button, at the moment, I think we're doing it here. Add component. Okay, here it is. Oh, and we also need to fix a bug where what this is supposed to do is only give you the list of components that you don't already have so that you can add those. Because at the moment you can add, you know, a camera component twice, which is just going to crash with an assert inside ent. So we'll draw the components here. I think that's what I did. And then what we'll do is, if I find this, because I want to get this right, obviously. And unfortunately, I had it before, but I lost everything. All right, here we go. So what I'll do is right after we draw the tag component, which is up here, I'll do ImGUI same line so that we continue on. We'll push item width -1, which should basically take up the rest of the width as far as I'm aware, because it'll go the width all the way to the right border, -1. And then we'll basically paste all this stuff. So we have our component now, and then we can, there's always flies flying around here. It's really annoying. It's because we've got like a plant over there. Worst. Anyway, and then we just do this, I think, as usual. So let's just take a look at this and make sure it's all good. We probably need to pop item width as well. Whoops. Pop item width. And then, yeah, so there we go. So we now have an add component button. Let's get rid of the tag because that's annoying and it's taking up space. I'll just add a little hash to hide it. And now we have a much nicer looking add component button that we can use to add a component. Now I also want to make the size a bit different because I don't want the minimum size to be too small. So ImGUI doesn't actually explicitly allow you to set size constraints for docked panels. As far as I'm aware, that doesn't exist. So the little workaround that I found for that is basically setting the entire minimum window size just for this dock space, right? So the way that we can do that is we'll get the style, ImGUI style equals ImGUI get style style.window minimum size equals, and we'll set it to 370, right, for the X. So you can't make a window less. So if the window is docked, it has to be at least 370 pixels wide, which I found is the perfect amount for our properties panel. And then we'll reset it back to what it was, which was 32. If you were really cool, I guess, you could probably get this first. So like min win size, you could probably get this and then reset it back to that. That way, if we change it later, we don't have to worry about setting it here as well. And then 370 is what it's going to be. And then for the rest of our windows, it will be fine. So let's check that out. Ideally, what ImGUI would do is probably take into account the maximum minimum size of all of the windows that we have here. And whatever that highest number is, that becomes the new minimum for all of the windows that are in the panel. But they don't do that. So, and that's probably what I would do in the future. Maybe I'll even add that change into our fork of ImGUI if we kind of get there, but there's other stuff that I want to do before that. So now you can see I can't make the panel less than the minimum width. Same for this one, and same for the viewport. So that's nice because we have a nice little balance for everything. But if we do take this out, then I can make it the minimum width, which is 32 by 32. Okay, so that works as expected. When you dock it, it doesn't immediately snap like that, but then you can resize it and you can't size it back. So that's also a little bit of a thing that you can do. Okay, cool. So there we go. Now that does kind of limit us a little bit, because if we launch this, you can see that it's kind of, there's not much space here really. If I move this back to the way it is, it doesn't look like there's much space. That is because we're launching, and that doesn't actually look perfect. Maybe our style will change that a little bit. Oh, it's because of the scroll bar. But anyway, you can see that's pretty much the perfect amount here if we don't have a scroll bar. But anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, so there's not much space here. So I think what I'll do, and this really should be exposed somewhere else, but I might set the default width and height to be 1600 by 900. I think that's a probably more accurate size. I mean, Hazel Dev just launches full on like maximized full screen. So I think that this is probably okay, and you can see that it provides plenty of space here for us to actually work with if we want to work windowed and not full screen, which would be kind of weird. I think that working full screen is probably what you want, and you can see that we definitely have plenty of size, definitely have plenty of space if we work on something like this. Okay, how much time do we have left? 35 minutes. Wow, this is taking a while. Haven't done the colors yet. Let me just slap in the colors because there's really not much to it, and it's kind of the last thing that I want to do. So the way that you can set your colors in IMGUI is pretty easy. If we go to IMGUI layer, then we are actually already kind of setting some certain colors, but basically what you can do is set dark theme colors. I'm just gonna make a little function for this. I guess I'll make it a member function instead of a static one, because we might want to, maybe I'll make it public. We might want to like expose that later to the UI so that we can flip between light theme and dark theme. So let's maybe implement this. I'll just do this, whoops, through Visual Assist. Okay. And now we'll get the style, which is like this. And in fact, I think it's just style.colors, so .colors. And what is that exactly? It's probably a IMVec4. Okay, sure. So we have the colors, and then now I just need to set certain colors. So obviously I'm not going to pretend that I don't have them in front of me. I'm just going to copy and paste them in. Hopefully you guys will forgive me for that, and I'll get rid of these pluses from the patch. Turns out I wasn't as cool, I wasn't cool enough to use it this way, so I'll have to quickly adjust like all of this. But basically these are the colors that I've worked out over the course of probably an hour or two during the stream. I think they look pretty good, and they're going to be our default colors for the time being. And of course, if there's an issue with something, yeah, I think this one, I wasn't sure this one was, so I just set it to pink, just so that if it would show up, I would see it. But in all seriousness, let's probably replace that with something that at least isn't going to look terrible. And now you're about to see the new Hazelnut. There it is. That's what it looks like. Okay, so we have, if we kind of collapse this, we have different like tab highlights and different tab colors based on what viewport is currently active as well. I left this thing as blue, and also I think the other thing that still is blue, because we haven't changed it from the default, I like checkboxes. So if checkboxes are on, you can see they still appear blue, but that looks kind of nice. So I've left it as is. Anyway, there you go. That's what Hazelnut looks like now. Let me know what you think of this new theme. This is how the kind of components look. We can remove that component and then add a new component. I haven't changed the background of this nor the file menu just yet. I'm not sure even what to set it to. We'll see. This is obviously subject to change as we go along with this, but I think it looks pretty cool. Yeah, that's what our theme looks like. So you can obviously check this out and clone this from GitHub and take a look at it on your own computer and let me know what you think of the theme, because I think it's pretty cool. Anyway, that is going to wrap up this episode. I'll probably tackle high DPI changes and all that stuff possibly next time. Or I think what I'll actually end up doing is like a bit of a maintenance episode. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button, and you can help support Hazel and everything that's going on by going to patreon.com/thecherno. Huge thank you to everyone who does help support this project and everything that I'm doing here on YouTube. Wouldn't be possible without you guys, so I really do appreciate all of your help. This whole Game Engine Series week, you'll be able to catch all the past live streams over there on Patreon, as well as see Hazel Dev, which is like the 3D C# scripting full-on editor version of Hazel that is progressing much more quickly than this. Thank you guys for watching. Next time, I think we're gonna make a start on serialization, which is going to be pretty exciting, so that we can actually construct a scene and then save it. So exciting stuff coming soon. See you guys later. Goodbye.